We found him in the void. Left behind, dead. Or at least we thought he was dead.
We opened the doors to hell, but with every attempt to escape, it pulled us in deeper.
He doesn't just kill, he breaks reality.
Someone has to stay. Someone has to finish this.
Not alone. Don't open it.
The Erebus Dawn floated in the vast emptiness of uncharted space, its engines humming softly as it carved a silent path through the void. Commander Rain Carter sat in her chair on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the faint blue glow of a nearby star. The long stretches of quiet were common out here, far beyond the edges of known space, but something about today unsettled her. It wasn't the silence, it was the nagging feeling that they weren't truly alone. "Commander," a voice broke the quiet. It was Navtech Ensign Kira Alden, seated at her station. Her face was tense, lips pressed into a thin line as her fingers moved over the console. "I'm picking up something unusual. A signal, I think." "What kind of signal?" Rain asked, her voice sharp and focused. "It's faint, repeating. Definitely not natural. I'm running a decryption pass now." Kira frowned as lines of alien text scrolled across her screen. "It's on a frequency I've never seen before." "Put it through," Rain ordered, leaning forward. The bridge fell silent as the audio crackled to life. At first, there was only static. Then a distorted voice emerged, a rasping, unnatural tone that made the hair on Rain's neck stand on end. "Not alone. Don't open. Not alone. Don't open." The loop played again and again, each repetition more distorted than the last. Rain exchanged a glance with Dr. Elena Vasquez, who stood by the observation port, her expression a mixture of curiosity and unease. "It's definitely intelligent," Vasquez said. "This could be a first contact situation. We have to investigate." "I don't know," Chief Engineer Dev Malhotra cut in. He was standing near the main console, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "That doesn't sound like something friendly. Maybe we leave it alone." "We don't ignore a signal like this," Vasquez argued, her eyes bright with determination. "It could be a distress call, and if it's not human, think of the scientific possibilities. We have a duty to investigate." Dev shook his head, his skepticism evident. "A duty to get ourselves killed, more like. We don't know what's out there. That thing could be a warning." "That's enough," Rain said, her tone ending the argument. "We've come too far to turn back now. Kira, locate the source." Kira nodded, fingers flying across her console. "Got it. Bearing 132 by 47. It's close, just under 20,000 kilometers out. Should I bring us in?" Rain hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Yes, slow approach. Full scan as we move." The Erebus Dawn shifted course, its thrusters firing in brief, controlled bursts. The crew held their breaths as the ship moved toward the source of the signal. The distance closed quickly, and soon the object appeared on their sensors, a massive structure drifting lifelessly in the void. "Magnify," Rain commanded. The main view screen flickered and the alien structure came into view. It was like nothing any of them had ever seen. A vast, semi-organic mass of metal and flesh fused together, pulsating faintly as though alive. Its surface was covered in a black, oily substance that reflected the dim starlight in unsettling patterns. "What is that?" Vasquez breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. Dev's hands tightened on the edge of the console. "I'll tell you what it is. Bad news. Preliminary scans show high levels of dimensional anomalies," Kira said, her voice trembling slightly. "Gravitational fluxes all over the place, and there's an opening on the far side. A portal, maybe. It's leaking that black stuff." "That's our entry point," Vasquez said, already moving toward the airlock. "Hold on," Dev protested. "We don't even know what that stuff is. For all we know, it'll melt us on contact." "That's why we take samples," Vasquez shot back. "We're scientists, Dev. This is why we're out here." Rain stood, cutting off the argument. "Enough. Vasquez is right. We're not leaving until we know what's going on here. Dev, get the EVA suits prepped. Kira, keep monitoring for any changes." Dev muttered something under his breath but obeyed. Within minutes, the away team was suited up and ready, standing in the airlock as the ship aligned with the derelict structure. The portal loomed large on the external cameras, a dark, jagged tear in the alien surface, oozing the same black substance that coated the rest of the structure. The team stepped into the docking tube, the faint vibrations of their footsteps the only sound. The tension was palpable, the air thick with unspoken fear. As they reached the alien structure, the portal pulsed, almost as if it were alive, and a faint, guttural sound echoed from within. "Keep your eyes open," Rain said as they stepped inside. The interior was worse than they'd imagined. The walls were a nightmare of shifting textures, a grotesque fusion of flesh and metal that seemed to ripple under their touch. Alien symbols covered every surface, glowing faintly with a sickly green light. The air smelled of decay and the temperature was oppressively warm. "This place isn't just dead," Dev said, his voice distorted through the comms. "It's wrong." As they moved deeper, they began to find the remains, twisted humanoid skeletons half fused with the walls, their faces frozen in silent screams. Vasquez crouched by one of them, her gloved hand brushing against the black substance that coated the bones. This isn't just a ship," she said, her voice trembling. "It's a tomb." "Commander," Kira's voice crackled through the comms from the ship. "I'm picking up movement inside the structure. Something's in there with you." Before Rain could respond, a shadow moved at the edge of their lights. A faint, wet sound echoed through the corridors, like something dragging itself across the floor. The team froze, weapons raised as the sound grew louder, closer. And then it emerged. The creature was humanoid in shape, but hideously decayed, its flesh sloughing off in chunks, revealing glistening sinew and blackened bone. Its face was a gaping void, and its hands dripped with a black, viscous substance that hissed and smoked as it touched the floor. It moved with an unnatural, jerking motion, its head cocked as if studying them. "Back to the ship," Rain ordered, her voice tight with fear. "Now!" The creature lunged faster than anything that size had a right to be. One of the crew screamed as it grabbed them, its hands sinking into their suit and flesh as though melting through butter. The others fired, the sounds of gunfire deafening in the confined space, but the creature barely reacted. Rain and the others made it back to the airlock, the creature pursuing them with relentless determination. As they sealed the door, they saw it staring at them through the small viewport, its grin impossibly wide. Back on the Erebus Dawn, the team tried to catch their breath, but the relief was short-lived. The black substance they'd brought aboard was already spreading, eating into the walls of the ship, and in the shadows of the corridors, something else was moving. The tension aboard the Erebus Dawn was suffocating. The crew had barely managed to escape the horrors of the alien structure, but their brief reprieve did little to soothe frayed nerves. Commander Rain Carter stood in the ship's dimly lit control room, her eyes glued to the holographic readouts of the derelict structure they had left behind. The black substance they had unknowingly brought back was already causing concern. It had begun to spread in containment, creeping along the edges of the quarantine chamber like a living shadow. "This, whatever it is," said Dr. Elena Vasquez, running scans on a tablet. "It's alive. It's behaving like some kind of parasitic organism. It's bonding with the metal, breaking it down at a molecular level, and why the hell do we still have it on board?" Chief Engineer Dev Malhotra snapped. He paced the room like a caged animal, his face pale and drawn. "I told you this would happen. That stuff is a cancer. We need to eject it now." Rain pinched the bridge of her nose. "We don't even know what it is, Dev. It could hold the key to understanding what we're dealing with, and if we eject it, we lose any chance of figuring out how to fight it." "If we don't eject it," Dev countered, his voice rising, "we might not have a ship left to fight it from." "Both of you, stop," Rain said, her voice sharp. "Dr. Vasquez, focus on containment and analysis. Dev, I need you monitoring the hull. If this stuff starts spreading beyond the chamber, I want to know immediately." Dev muttered something under his breath but stormed off to comply. Vasquez hesitated, looking like she wanted to argue, but a sudden alert from the main console interrupted her. "Commander," said Kira Alden, the navigation officer, her voice trembling slightly, "we're picking up anomalies." "What kind of anomalies?" Rain asked, stepping closer. Kira's face was illuminated by the flickering glow of her screen. "Dimensional distortions. Small, localized, but they're spreading." "Where?" Kira hesitated before responding. "The medical bay." A cold weight settled in Rain's chest. "Get a team down there now." The corridors of the Erebus Dawn were eerily quiet as Rain led Vasquez and a pair of security officers toward the medical bay. The ship's hum, once a comforting background noise, now seemed like the growl of something unseen. When they arrived, the heavy door to the bay was partially ajar, its locking mechanism corroded and twisted. A faint, acrid smell wafted out, making Rain's stomach churn. "Stay sharp," she ordered, raising her sidearm. The group entered slowly, their footsteps muffled against the metal floor. The medical bay was in disarray. Equipment lay scattered, monitors flickered erratically, and the air felt thicker, almost heavy. In the center of the room, a jagged black tear hovered in midair, a roiling mass of darkness that seemed to bend light around it. The edges of the rift rippled as though alive, and faint whispers emanated from within, words that sounded almost human but were incomprehensible. "What is that?" Vasquez whispered, staring at the anomaly. Rain's hand tightened around her weapon. It's a breach, like the one in the structure. Before anyone could respond, something emerged from the rift. It moved like a shadow given form, a creature vaguely humanoid but grotesquely twisted. Its skin was mottled and decayed, hanging in loose, slimy folds. Its hands dripped with the same black, acidic substance they had seen on the alien structure, and its face was a gaping void of darkness that seemed to swallow all light. "Get back!" Rain shouted, but the creature was already moving. One of the security officers opened fire, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing through the bay. The bullets hit the creature, but instead of piercing it, they seemed to dissolve into its body, leaving only ripples in its decayed flesh. The creature lunged, grabbing the officer by the arm. The acidic slime on its hands hissed and bubbled as it melted through the man's suit and skin. His screams were deafening as he was dragged toward the rift, disappearing into the void. "Fall back!" Rain yelled, firing her weapon uselessly as the creature turned its eyeless gaze toward her. She grabbed Vasquez, who was frozen in terror, and pulled her toward the door. The remaining officer managed to seal the medical bay behind them, but the sounds of the creature's guttural growls and the officer's fading screams echoed in their ears. The group stumbled back into the corridor, breathless and shaken. "What the hell was that?" Vasquez gasped, her face pale and streaked with sweat. Rain didn't answer immediately. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of what they had just seen. "It's connected to the black substance," she said finally. "The breach, the creature. It's all tied to that thing we brought aboard." "So, eject it," Vasquez said, her voice rising. "We need to get it off this ship before it kills us all." "We don't know if ejecting it will stop this," Rain said. "The breaches are already happening. We need to figure out how to contain them." "How?" Vasquez demanded. "How do you contain something that can warp reality?" Rain didn't have an answer. The truth was, she didn't know if containment was even possible, but she couldn't let the crew see her doubt. "We'll figure it out," she said, trying to sound confident. "We have to." As they returned to the bridge, the situation only grew worse. More breaches began appearing throughout the ship, each one accompanied by strange phenomena. Lights flickering, gravity shifting, and that horrible whispering that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Crew members reported seeing movement in the shadows, shapes that disappeared when they turned to look. Dev was waiting for them, his face grim. "It's spreading," he said without preamble. "The black stuff, whatever it is, it's in the ventilation system now. If it keeps going, we're screwed." "We need options," Rain said. "Can we isolate it? Seal off the affected sections?" Dev shook his head. "Not fast enough. This thing eats through metal like acid. It's just a matter of time before it reaches critical systems." "Then we focus on the breaches," Vasquez said. "If we can stop them, maybe the substance will stop spreading." "And how do you propose we do that?" Dev asked, his tone edged with frustration. "We don't even know how they're opening." Before anyone could respond, an alarm blared throughout the ship. Kira's voice crackled over the comms, frantic and panicked. "Commander, we've got a breach on the bridge. It's..." The transmission cut off, replaced by static. Rain's stomach dropped. She grabbed her weapon and turned to Vasquez and Dev. "We're out of time. Let's move." As they ran toward the bridge, Rain couldn't shake the feeling that the Erebus Dawn was already lost. The breaches were multiplying, the black substance was spreading, and now the crew was being picked off one by one. And somewhere in the growing darkness, the creature was waiting. The Erebus Dawn groaned like a dying beast, its metal frame trembling under the strain of the dimensional rifts spreading through its corridors. The once sterile ship now felt alive in the worst possible way, its walls oozing black tendrils of corrosive substance. Commander Rain Carter stood in the engineering bay, sweat dripping down her face despite the frigid air. She stared at the holographic display Dev had projected in front of them, a chaotic swirl of energy signatures radiating from the alien structure they had escaped. "It's not random," Vasquez said, pointing at the data. Her voice was tight, strained. "The breaches are all connected. Every one of them originates from that structure. It's like it's the center of a web." "A web we're caught in," Dev muttered, arms crossed as he leaned against the console. His eyes were bloodshot, his usual sharp demeanor replaced by a weariness that made him look 10 years older. "It's pulling us back." "It's not just pulling us back," Rain said, her voice grim. "It's breaking the ship apart, piece by piece. If we don't shut it down, it won't stop until there's nothing left of the Erebus Dawn. Or us." "How do we shut it down?" Vasquez asked, turning to face her. "We don't even know what it is." "We go back to the source," Rain said. Her tone brooked no argument, though the look in her eyes betrayed her own fear. "That structure is the key. If we can find out how it's creating these rifts, we can stop it." Dev's head snapped up. "You can't be serious. You want to go back into that thing, after everything we saw, after what it did to our people." "We don't have a choice," Rain said firmly. "The ship won't last much longer, and neither will we." For a moment, no one spoke. The faint hum of the ship's failing systems filled the silence, punctuated by the occasional distant groan of metal as another breach formed somewhere on board. Finally, Dev let out a heavy sigh. "Fine," he said. "But if we're doing this, we're doing it smart. I've been working on something." He gestured to a set of bulky devices sitting on the workbench behind him. "Dimensional anchors. They should keep us tethered to our reality, at least in theory. If that thing tries to pull us into its dimension, these might give us a chance to fight back." "Might," Vasquez echoed, her voice heavy with doubt. "It's the best I've got," Dev snapped. "Unless you've got a better idea, Doc." "Enough," Rain cut in. "Dev, get the anchors ready. Vasquez, gather whatever data we have on the structure. We leave in 10 minutes." The team returned to the alien structure through one of the larger rifts, now tearing through the Erebus Dawn. The air in the portal chamber was thick with an electric charge, the black substance creeping along the walls like veins. As they stepped through, the familiar, nauseating pull of the dimensional rift gripped their bodies, and for a moment Rain felt like she was being turned inside out. Then, with a sudden lurch, they were inside. The structure was worse than they remembered. The walls shifted and pulsed, organic and metallic elements writhing together in grotesque patterns. The alien symbols that had once glowed faintly now blazed with a sickly green light, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move independently of the team's motions. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the faint sound of wet, slithering movement echoed through the corridors. "This place is alive," Vasquez whispered, her voice trembling. "It's evolving." "Stay focused," Rain said, gripping her weapon tightly. "Dev, where's the obelisk?" Dev adjusted the scanner strapped to his wrist, frowning at the readings. "It's ahead, maybe 100 meters. But there's interference, dimensional fluxes everywhere. It's like the structure's warping itself." They moved cautiously, every step deliberate. The deeper they went, the more the environment changed. The walls began to sprout jagged, bone-like protrusions, and the floor was slick with a viscous, black fluid. They passed what looked like corpses, alien skeletons twisted into unnatural shapes, some fused with the walls or floor. One of them had its jaw hanging open, its face stretched into an eternal scream. "What the hell happened here?" Vasquez asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't just a ship," Rain said, her eyes scanning the grotesque surroundings. "It was a prison. They built this to contain something, and it got out." They reached the obelisk chamber without incident, though the oppressive atmosphere made it feel like they were being watched. The obelisk stood in the center of the room, a towering spire of blackened metal and flesh, oozing the same corrosive substance that plagued the Erebus dawn. Strange symbols spiraled up its surface, glowing faintly. "This is it," Dev said, his voice shaky. "This thing is the source of the dimensional rifts." "Can you interface with it?" Rain asked. "I can try," Dev said, moving toward the obelisk with a mix of hesitation and determination. He began attaching one of the dimensional anchors to its base, his hands trembling slightly. As Dev worked, Vasquez examined the chamber, her eyes drawn to the walls. They were covered in alien carvings, depicting scenes of chaos and destruction. One image showed a creature emerging from a portal, its body grotesque and decayed, leaving a trail of death in its wake. "It's a record," Vasquez said. "They were warning us. This thing, SCP-106, it's not just some predator. It's entropy given form. Wherever it goes, it brings decay." Before Rain could respond, a guttural growl echoed through the chamber. The team froze, their breaths caught in their throats. Slowly, they turned toward the sound. SCP-106 stood in the entrance, its body a grotesque amalgamation of decayed flesh and the remains of its victims. It had grown since they last saw it, its form now bristling with jagged protrusions and warped limbs, its eyeless face tilted toward them as if studying its prey. "Dev, how much longer?" Rain hissed, raising her weapon. "Almost there," Dev shouted, frantically working on the anchor. The creature lunged, its movements impossibly fast. Rain fired, the shots hitting its body but doing little more than slowing it down. Vasquez screamed as the creature swiped at her, its hand grazing her arm and leaving behind a trail of smoking flesh. Rain grabbed Vasquez, dragging her back as Dev shouted, "Done." "The anchor's online." A faint hum filled the air as the anchor activated, creating a shimmering barrier around the obelisk. The creature recoiled, its body distorting as if fighting against the field. "It's working," Dev yelled, "but it's not enough to stop it. We need a biological link to stabilize the obelisk and shut down the rifts." "A link?" Rain demanded. "What kind of link?" Dev hesitated, his face pale. A living one. The words hung heavy in the air as SCP-106 roared, its rage shaking the very walls of the chamber. The obelisk pulsed violently, its sickly green glow illuminating the grotesque chamber. The dimensional rifts around it began to crackle and warp, each pulse rippling through the walls of the alien structure like waves through a dying organism. SCP-106 loomed in the shadows, its monstrous form shifting as though it were made of liquid and decay, every movement accompanied by the nauseating sound of wet flesh sliding against itself. The creature stared at them with its void-like face, as though it understood what was about to happen, and reveled in their desperation. Rain Carter stood in the center of the chaos, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead, her body trembling from exhaustion and fear. She looked at Dev Malhotra, whose hands were shaking as he clutched the control panel he had hastily attached to the obelisk. Beside him, Dr. Elena Vasquez clutched her burned arm, her face pale and drenched in sweat. "What do you mean, a living link?" Rain demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. Dev hesitated, avoiding her gaze. The obelisk was designed to contain SCP-106 by linking its dimensional energy to a biological host. A sacrifice, Commander. It's the only way to stabilize the field and collapse the rifts. Rain stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. A sacrifice. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. "You're saying one of us has to stay here with that thing?" Dev nodded, his jaw clenched. "There's no other way. Without a host, the obelisk can't maintain the connection long enough to seal the rifts. If we don't do this, SCP-106 will destroy the ship, and us." Elena's voice trembled as she spoke. "But whoever links to it, they'll be consumed by it, won't they? Just like the aliens who built this place." Dev didn't answer. He didn't have to. For a moment, none of them spoke. The only sounds were the low hum of the obelisk, the distant crackling of dimensional tears, and the grotesque wet growl of SCP-106 as it crept closer. Rain looked at her team, at Dev, who had been her closest ally for years, and at Vasquez, whose unshakable curiosity had kept them alive in the face of horrors no one could have imagined. Then she made her decision. "I'll do it," Rain said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions roiling inside her. "No," Vasquez said immediately, stepping forward. "Rain, you can't." "I'm the commander," Rain cut her off, her tone sharp but not unkind. "This is my responsibility." "You don't have to," Dev began, but Rain silenced him with a look. "Yes, I do," she said, softer now. Her gaze moved between the two of them. "You're the only ones left. If this ship has any chance of making it out of here, it's on you. Dev, you know the systems better than anyone. And Vasquez, you'll figure out what comes next. I trust you." Tears welled in Vasquez's eyes, but she said nothing. Dev's hands curled into fists, his jaw tightening as he fought to hold back his emotions. Rain stepped toward the obelisk, the dim green light casting her face in sharp relief. The closer she got, the more she felt the pull of the structure, like an invisible force tugging at her soul. She glanced back at her team one last time. "Get back to the ship," she said. "Seal the portal behind you, and don't stop until you're clear of this place." "Rain," Vasquez's voice cracked, but Rain shook her head. "Go," she said firmly. "That's an order." Dev grabbed Vasquez's arm, pulling her toward the exit. "Come on, we can't waste her sacrifice." Vasquez resisted for a moment, her eyes locked on Rain, but then she nodded, tears streaming down her face. Together they fled, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor. Rain turned back to the obelisk, her heart pounding as she placed her hands against its surface. It was warm to the touch, almost alive. The alien carvings glowed brighter, and the chamber began to quake as the obelisk responded to her presence. She could feel it reaching into her mind, pulling at her memories, her thoughts, her very essence. The growl behind her grew louder. She didn't need to turn around to know SCP-106 was there, its twisted form looming over her. She could feel its malevolence, its hunger, like a physical weight pressing down on her. "You're not getting out," Rain said, her voice shaking but resolute. "Not this time." She closed her eyes and let the obelisk take her. Pain erupted through her body, a searing agony unlike anything she had ever felt. Her mind was flooded with images, fractured memories of the alien race that had built this prison, their desperate attempts to contain the creature, their ultimate failure. She saw them sacrifice themselves one by one until there was no one left. And then she saw SCP-106's dimension. It was a place of endless decay, a realm where time and matter dissolved into nothingness. She felt the creature's mind, its insatiable hunger for entropy, its delight in destruction. And she understood. This wasn't just a predator. It was a force of nature, a living embodiment of death and decay. But Rain wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The obelisk flared with light, brighter and brighter, until the entire chamber was bathed in a blinding glow. SCP-106 howled, its form writhing and distorting as it was pulled toward the obelisk. The rifts in the chamber began to collapse, one by one, as the creature's dimensional energy was siphoned into the structure. Rain felt her body dissolving, her consciousness merging with the obelisk. She could feel the creature's rage, its desperate attempts to escape, but she held it back, using every ounce of her will to keep it contained. The last thing she heard was Dev's voice over the comms, faint and distant. "We're clear, Commander. We're out." And then there was silence. The Erebus dawn drifted through the void, battered but intact. Dev and Vasquez sat in the cockpit of the lifeboat, staring at the derelict structure as it collapsed in on itself, folding into a single point of light before vanishing completely. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The weight of what they had lost and what they had survived hung heavy in the air. Finally, Vasquez broke the silence. "Do you think she knew that we'd make it?" Dev nodded, his throat tight. "She knew." They sat in silence as the lifeboat drifted into the endless void, and somewhere, in the dark expanse of space, a faint signal echoed, a garbled transmission repeating the words, "Not alone. Don't open.